There's actually some kind of a paradox because a lot of Bitcoiners don't believe anything outside of Bitcoin has any value. But how does that make any sense if you believe that longer term, the whole world is going to be run on Bitcoin? Think about the world right now. Someone in Egypt cannot buy stocks in the US. Why isn't this whole thing global? DEXs are decentralized stock markets.
If you could make the case for Bitcoiners, this is actually something that's really interesting. If we brought it to Bitcoin, it could offer a lot of good to the world. What applications would you like to see built?
Big application, I think, is very clear now is stablecoins. I think one of the big reasons that Lightning hasn't taken off is because it doesn't really solve an actual customer need right now. A lot of the more religious Bitcoin believers will use it just because they want to use Bitcoin, but for a normal person, it doesn't make any sense. Stablecoins actually does that.
Crypto Conversion is back with a wonderful guest here, Willem Schroe. Schroe, I don't know how you want to pronounce that.
Yeah, you can say Schroe. It's hard.
Okay. Willem is, he's from, not the US, he's from the great country of Belgium. And so he is blessing our country here with his presence. And he just recently graduated from Harvard Business School and is the CEO and founder of Botanix Labs, which is creating the Spiderchain, which is a layer 2 scaling solution for Bitcoin. You're trying to bring EVM to Bitcoin, trying to merge those two worlds together. I got that right?
Absolutely. That's correct.
Okay, good. Well, we're glad to have you here. We've had a lot of discussions here and there just about the culture in Bitcoin, how there are Bitcoin maximalists, there are Lightning maximalists, if you will. There self-custody maximalists. There's the ordinal group, a lot of scaling people, a lot of sidechain people. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how that all fits together. But let's start off with just how did you get into Bitcoin? How did you, I don't know are you a Bitcoin first or an EVM person first? I don't even know. And how did you get to Bitcoin, get to crypto first? And then how did that lead into Botanix? How'd you start that?
Yeah, sounds good. I'm Willem, grew up in Belgium, lived most of my life there, ended up being third in the national mathematics competition, so very heavy on the mathematics side of things. Then ended up doing electrical engineering, and that was a little bit the intro into crypto. Is I did my master's in electrical engineering in Belgium as well. Also where David Chaum was, by the way, and a few other famous people. Belgium is very big in the cryptography world. And so I researched there in authenticated encryption. I broke some encryption algorithms there. And so that's when I first got connected to Bitcoin. Now I'm a very risk-averse person, so never really invested or dug deeper. Then I left that space a little bit, started working in chemicals, did a bunch of different roles, which eventually brought me to Saudi Arabia. So I lived 2 years in Saudi. And it's actually there where I fully fell down the rabbit hole, where I started seeing the whole macro picture. I traveled around there. I went to Lebanon, and it was like 2018, 2019. There were massive protests against the government then, against Hezbollah. So I was there at the main square. I also met a lot of people, and you could see really like hyperinflation starting to happen there. So inflation was 20-30% then. I saw some people get their bank accounts seized, and that's when you really start to put everything together that you need some kind of international, global, permissionless money. Put one and one together in macro. Fell fully down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, became a very, very big advocate for Bitcoin, and a big Bitcoin believer. That's also when I applied to the Harvard Business School. So that brought me to Boston, and that was more or less when the bull run happened. So suddenly I was a very big Bitcoin maxi. But then you see the bull run happening, and I was actually the only Bitcoiner at school. All the rest was only interested in things outside of Bitcoin. But then what I saw happening was that a lot of applications were being built, a lot of buzz was being generated out of that, and I saw a lot of applications reach product market fit. And so all these applications, they're there's very little that has reached product market fit on Bitcoin, but all these other applications that have reached product market fit, think DEXs, DeFi, stable coins, NFTs, they're all built on virtual machines where the EVM is the big example of the big virtual machine where all these dApps are built on. And so basically I realized, okay, Bitcoin is by far the winning money, but we have all these applications, they're built on an EVM, and the EVM might be the winning virtual machine to bring these dApps to Bitcoin. That's a little bit the story on why I wanted to build a second layer EVM on Bitcoin.
Okay, cool. And then did you start then Botanix Labs with other people you met at Harvard, people you knew previously? How did that all come together?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So while I have some coding background, my coding skills are very, very limited and rusty. So I had to find some people to bring a team together. Now at the Harvard Business School, there weren't really any people interested in that. So I started venturing out. Basically, I had this idea of bringing a second layer EVM to Bitcoin. And I started going to the MIT Bitcoin Club. I'm not sure if you're familiar with BitDevs. So BitDevs is one of the more technical Bitcoin meetups. So there's a Boston BitDevs, started venturing in there. Basically started talking with a lot of people, and then started really researching in the layer 2 space. So I read all the different white papers, went back to my cryptography background, and started building a team of people who were interested in this type of sidechains. And that's basically how we ended up growing this. Yeah.
Okay, it's awesome. It's very cool. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Harvard and MIT, they're right down the street from you, so definitely good resource to tap into there. And then, before we diverge the conversation too much, can you just give a quick summary, quick overview? What is Spiderchain? What is how is that different than? And maybe not even get there. Maybe not even how is it different from other L2s or other, whatever scaling solutions. But just what is Spiderchain?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me take it even one level higher. Basically, the Spiderchain is a sidechain, and a sidechain basically means that you run a different blockchain next to Bitcoin that is connected to Bitcoin, so to speak. And it is one of the options you have to scale Bitcoin. Like we talked about before, you could have Lightning, which isn't a blockchain. You could have other solutions, and a sidechain is, in fact, an extension to Bitcoin, which also runs a blockchain and creates different blocks where you can transact on. And so there's different types of proposals for sidechains. Probably everyone has heard of Drivechains, which is the Paul Stork proposal that needs a soft fork. There's a few other sidechain proposals as well, like space chains, state chains, etc. And Spiderchain is one of those sidechains. And the Spiderchain basically is a series of what you call special multisigs. And that series of special multisigs makes sure that the whole sidechain is decentralized. And to go back a little bit more higher level is basically any sidechain, you have to always think about two building blocks. One is how do you control the actual Bitcoin on the main chain? And the second part is how do you reach consensus for the second part of your chain? And so when I talk about these decentralized multisigs, that's talking about how do you secure the Bitcoin that's actually on Bitcoin. And the Spiderchain actually puts this Bitcoin in a series of decentralized small multisigs. And the whole consensus part of the second part is then the proof of stake. So the second sidechain, the second blockchain is secured by proof of stake in the sense that anyone will be able to stake Bitcoin on Bitcoin, and that secures basically the sidechain in a very rough overview.
Okay.
Trying to avoid to get too technical.
Yeah. So we've got two parts. We have, the Bitcoin that's on Spiderchain is secured in these separate multi-sig wallets, that are decentralized because they're and to get into the technicalities a little bit, it's decentralized because you have kind of random validators are on each of these signatures, so it's hard to kind of corroborate with other people. And then so people who stake their Bitcoin in these multi-sigs are able to secure the sidechain with this proof of stake model you have, right? So
correct, yeah.
So good. So it is definitely a cool system. And not to get Brandon, Connor, feel free to jump in whenever, but just to maybe get the conversation a little on the cultural level here now. What have been the reactions to this proposal? Because I'll be honest, I've been following a bit, and I think especially proof of stake, when people see that word, they're like, oh no, we hate that, right? So I'm curious what, good and bad, what has all the reactions been?
Yeah, the funny thing here is actually about the Spiderchain is we are probably doing an extremely big amount of controversial things. One, we're building an EVM, which is everybody in their mind still connects that to Ethereum, while they're actually very different things. Then we're also doing proof of stake, and you always had people who were either proof of stake or proof of work. Now we're bringing the two camps together, and so on a lot of different cultural lines, we're like breaking them right in the middle. And so yes, like you said, we had a lot of people who actually really like it, a lot of people who actually really hate it, and generally, I think it's always funny when people think outside of the Bitcoin space and refer to them as the Bitcoiners, because that's as far as the truth as you can get. Like the whole Bitcoin space is not aligned at all, and that's why it's decentralized. They cannot find agreement on anything. And so you have the people, like you said earlier, who think you need to scale in non-side chains. You have the people who scale in side chains. You have the people who believe in the EVM. You have the people who don't believe in the EVM. You have people that either believe in proof of stake, and you have people that don't believe in proof of stake. And when you read the white paper, I try to explain some of these more controversial design decisions, for example, like a proof of stake. Because I actually personally, so I have background in the energy industry, I was personally very much against proof of stake before designing the Spiderchain. But then you go deeper into like, okay, why are people against proof of stake? Does it make sense? So you really go back to the technology and you start to realize that proof of stake, for example, makes so much sense on the second layer. It has a lot of different downsides when you build it as a layer 1, but they're basically removed if you build it on a proof of work on a layer 2. And so all these design decisions are very consciously taken, but on a cultural level, it's breaking a lot of barriers. So in short, there's been a lot of haters, but we heard some very good things actually from a lot of very technical people in the Bitcoin space, like definitely a few core developers. And here in New York, we have the New York BitDevs, which have a very one of the most technical people here, same as in Boston, where, for example, Taj lives. So generally, from more technical people, it's actually been very, very well accepted. I think it's been less accepted from what people often refer to as Bitcoin maxis with a very loud voice that actually less fully understand the deeper down technology. Hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like Spiderchains is kind of like coming out at this time when these discussions are super relevant, in Bitcoin. We've come off a string of, with Taproot Wizards, with UDI, with Bitcoin Ordinals, Drivechains, Spiderchains, and then most recently Bitvm. And so people are kind of curious, about what larger than money possibilities, Bitcoin might hold. And these discussions are definitely kind of awakening a lot of very ideological beliefs on both sides. But so you're bringing in some ideas, like you said, that are very controversial. But then you also, have some very core Bitcoin beliefs that you guys are going off of here. So, for example, Drivechains, although maybe it's a good proposal, it does require a hard fork, and for that reason alone, or soft fork, sorry, but a lot of Bitcoin maxis are opposed to this, and it doesn't look like, at least in the current environment, something like that might go through. But Spiderchains doesn't. It doesn't require any sort of fork at all. So it definitely keeps the integrity of the Bitcoin chain as it is, continued. But then you're also importing a lot of, like you said, a lot of ideas from Ethereum. So I'm curious if I know you've worked with a lot of developers on developing this. Are you guys firmly in the Bitcoin camp, or are you bringing in potentially developers from Ethereum to help you, build this connection? And since you are working on the Ethereum Virtual Machine, do you envision any sort of interoperability in the wider crypto space here between Bitcoin and Ethereum, Avalanche, other EVM compatible chains?
So let me answer the first question. Do I bring developers from outside of Bitcoin? So the developer team is actually coming from mostly the Bitcoin side of things. Like developing on Bitcoin is still very hard. Developing on Taproot is not easy. But then we also have people who have experience basically on both sides of things, people who have developed on Ethereum and on Bitcoin. And then there's some people who worked before on building Bitcoin to Ethereum bridges. So it's actually a lot of deep level knowledge of experience. So I think it's a very good mixed team. Now, in terms of business development and partnerships, that will be more focused actually on the Ethereum side of things, because there already a lot of dApps are already built that can basically come over back to Bitcoin. And I forgot your second question. What was that?
I'm just curious if you envision any sort of interoperability in the wider crypto space, since you're building on the virtual machine here. There's obviously a lot of chains already that can communicate on the same layer. Do you think Bitcoin is going to be a player on that, or do you see this as possibly replacing, some of the functions of what Ethereum has already developed?
So yes and no. There's a short-term answer and there's a long-term answer. So I do believe it makes most sense that there's one reserve currency in the world, just because of financial network effects. We've seen that play out over and over in the history of the world. So longer term, I think everything will run, or mostly everything will run on Bitcoin rails. Now, short term, we absolutely believe in interoperability. And the funny thing is, people have been wanting to build a Bitcoin to Ethereum bridge, I don't know, for the last 5 years. But building bridges is extremely hard and insecure. Like generally, most of the attacks in crypto have always been on bridges. And the reason is, when you think about the tech stack, when you have two layer ones, you have layer one here and here, for example. If you bridge, you need to secure your asset locking on one side, you need to secure your asset locking on the other side, and then you need to secure the bridge. And so how do you secure all these different things? And it becomes a very complex network. With a lot of different attack vectors, so it's way more secure to build in layers on top of each other. But one of the things that an EVM enables is we have figured out how to build EVM bridges. In a sense that these are one of the most secure bridges, because you go from very similar tech stacks. And so you can take pieces from end to end. And once you have basically Botanix, which is fully EVM equivalent, you can very easily build an EVM bridge. And so think about an EVM bridge going from Botanix Bitcoin to Ethereum. And then suddenly the wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum can easily transfer back to Bitcoin through Botanix, and the opposite way as well. So your wrapped Bitcoin can become decentralized. And so I think that will be one of the applications that might gain product market fit here.
This is very interesting, because some of the projects that I have been involved in over the past 2 years, they've started in Bitcoin. So we had to deposit Bitcoin in order to, get some stake in the project. And then the way we've been able to get profit out was opening the EVM rabbit hole for people to be able to start profiting off of the project itself. And it wasn't otherwise, the Bitcoin was locked in. You had your tokens, but you couldn't do anything with it until they enabled the EVM connection. Then you could go to Uniswap, do what you needed to do, get your USDC, go to Coinbase, and then cash out. So it feels like this is almost a better option to that, because you're able to keep things kind of in the Bitcoin universe and not have to pull in all of the other resources for people to be able to move their money the way they want to in a more decentralized fashion on a superior blockchain and more stable blockchain, which is, of course, Bitcoin, as we all come to know and appreciate. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You nailed it. One of the big issues in any of the projects is you always have to ask yourself, who has the keys? In any project, who has the keys? And so in all typical classical projects, there's always a central party. And so what you say when you have to send Bitcoin to a certain address is basically the central party that has the keys to that multisig. And then everything else of the code base is basically disconnected from that. And that's basically what the Spiderchain is. What the big breakthrough of the Spiderchain is, we found a way to decentralize multisigs. And that's actually the big breakthrough. Even ZK or optimistic rollups actually have central keys. Like Optimism, Arbitrum, they have a set of keys and they can steal all the Ethereum. And so that centralized multisig problem has been a huge problem over the last few years. And that's where the Spiderchain's power really lies, is how to decentralize those multisigs. And so as you said, like now suddenly a huge amount of applications are enabled in a decentralized fashion.
Do you anticipate there being opportunities with the side chains to enable things like, the ENS equivalents on Ethereum and things like that for just the everyday person to be able to, build domains and just establish new things that way as well?
Yeah. Yeah, the funny thing is we're fully EVM equivalent. Like EVM on its own doesn't have a currency.
No.
It's purely code base on how to transition states, etc. So you can take purely the EVM and you can put that on Bitcoin. And so anything that you see on Ethereum, any application, you just copy paste that code and you plug it into Botanix. Basically, you deploy that contract on Botanix and it works. So take ENS, you just take the basis of the code base of ENS and you plug it into Botanix, and suddenly that full thing, that naming system, runs on Bitcoin. And so, yeah, absolutely, that's definitely possible.
Yeah, I do think on that route, it'll be interesting to see whether the groups and projects port themselves over, or, are we going to see Uniswap first or a Uniswap clone, before they finally, shipped over?
That's a very good question, actually, because the funny thing is, personally, as a founder, I'm in this conundrum now, like, do we partner with a lot of existing projects, or do we partner with new founding teams? Because today you can deploy a PancakeSwap, for example, in a day. You can deploy an OpenSea or any NFT marketplace. You can deploy that in a day. Actually, the biggest amount of work is the front end. Deploying the smart contract takes 20 minutes. But you need to build, you need to run the server, you need to build the front end, etc., which you can probably do in a day. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see if the clone's gonna win out on Bitcoin, or it's gonna be the incumbents that are gonna be taking over. Classical business theory would say that it's gonna be new founding teams because the incumbents always move very slow. But then again, this is a very different world than classical business. So
no, and in this world, wherever the closest lane to profit is kind of where everybody ends up, which does make it unique in that respect, because people, I appreciate people's attempt at altruism in this space, but if we're being honest, we're all trying to profit in some way, shape, or form, and it's okay to say that. We're not gonna save the world one project at a time. We're all trying to also, make some substance for our lives, improve our situations, and we all have to kind of take that into consideration. So it's helpful sometimes to hear that, yeah, we're doing this also to make money. We're not just doing this out of the goodness of our hearts. If we were all doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, the world would be a very different place, in my opinion. So, but it's refreshing to see it getting taken advantage of on the Bitcoin side, because it's such an untapped opportunity. And you tell me that the maxis aren't going to dabble in it in some way, shape, or form, you're lying, because they will try it just to be facetious and be like, look, I tried it and it didn't work, but they're still supporting it by trying it, which will be hysterical when that comes out. But yeah, that's at least that's kind of where I sit with some of this, and looking at all of the different options, and just the security alone is probably the biggest selling point from where I sit.
Yeah. The interesting thing here is there's actually most of the people, I would say, in crypto are there indeed for profits, but I think that's what separates some of the very religious Bitcoiners. So some people refer to Bitcoin as a religion. A lot of people there would literally never sell their Bitcoin because of religious reasons, in the sense that they actually think this will make the world a better place, and they're not in there for the profit. They would write their Bitcoin to zero before selling it, just because they realize that a world where you have permissionless money, where people cannot steal or a government cannot take away your money, or where the government cannot print money, make everyone less equal, basically create massive amount of corruption and inequality, and they are happy to pay for that. So I think that's a very interesting insight that also attracted me to Bitcoin. But in terms of actually using applications and utility, absolutely there's a phrase called sales is like water. And basically the quickest road to profit is what eventually is where you reach product market fit. And those are definitely in crypto the guiding principles where
speaking of profit, if you don't mind me asking, how much capital is needed to support the side chain? Like, what are some of the things that make it tick from what you need to have everything function cohesively? I'm looking at the white paper right now, and I see some of your mitigation strategies for attacks and things like that. How do you avoid some of the mistakes that were made from other L1s that created side chains that were very parallel to each other, while also maintaining, enough funds to stay above water, respectively?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, about talking about the attacks in the white paper, I always find it very interesting to read a lot of white papers where people don't go into the different attack vectors.
They don't.
Like, I'm surprised that if you're not aware of which attacks are possible, how you can build a secure protocol. But that just as a side. I think what is needed to have the protocol fully running fluently is basically a sufficient capital base. Like we talked about before, is you need enough stakers. As long as not enough people run a full node and basically stake Bitcoin to run a Botanix node, then we are not fully decentralized. So if you only have, 50 nodes running, you can question how centralized or decentralized it is. But then again, if you have a few thousand Bitcoin staked and a few thousand node operators, then it becomes then it starts becoming very decentralized. And so it's a little bit, that's what Bitcoin was in the beginning as well, right? In the beginning, it was first 2 years, a very centralized system, but you need to have as a protocol a trend towards decentralization. And we believe with the Spiderchain, it has the underlying design to have a trend towards decentralization. We will start off centralized, of course, which I think is actually a good thing to develop a protocol centralized, because it makes it more efficient. As an example in that, we've seen Lightning, which has been developed decentralized, multiple implementation, who couldn't talk with each other and are still struggling to implement that. So having a centralized party basically develop the first version and then have a decentralization trend, I think makes a lot of sense. So in general, to answer your question very short is you need enough Bitcoin staked.
Sure.
What is sorry, there's a few questions in here. I do want to know what you think the cost of running a Botanix node would be. Is it simply running it's probably not simply running a Bitcoin node, because you're also having to keep track of the side chain. Do you have to have both the way that you do with Lightning? And then in asking that, let's start there. And then I've got like 5 follow-ups. One at a time, though.
Sounds good. So that's actually an interesting philosophical question as well, because it's one of the reasons that Bitcoin chose to have only 10-minute blocks, etc. is they wanted it to be able to be run by every person in the world. So it has very little hardware requirements. You can run it on a Raspberry Pi, basically. Ethereum went way deeper in that and has quite big hardware requirements. I would say that typically only companies are able to run a full Ethereum node. And we're going to be very similar to Ethereum in that sense. So you'll have those type of hardware requirements, which is more going to be for the companies. And I think that aligns in my vision of how I think the decentralized world should be like. I think Bitcoin as the main layer has to be absolutely the most decentralized, should be able to be run by every person in the world. Then you go to a second layer, a little bit less decentralization requirements, but still sufficiently decentralized. And so it's optimized for every company in the world to be able to run a full node, so to speak. And some hobbyists, some wealthier individuals with a lot of more technical knowledge. That's basically the vision that I see. So you build the decentralization and the hardware requirements in different levels of the tech stack.
That makes sense. And then I am kind of curious, right? The whole reason we have to scale Bitcoin is because there's this limit to block size, which keeps it so that, I could, the blockchain is only like 500 gigabytes right now, right? I am guessing that you're going to have larger block sizes, or, maybe the same block size, but a lot more frequently. Are you like, what is the upper limit of Botanix going to be, right? Because Ethereum has an upper limit that people keep hitting, which is why you have L2s and L3s now on top of it. So what's our upper limit to Botanix?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's basically the design space that any blockchain faces. And it's a blockchain trilemma. Do you go for full decentralization and security? That's what Bitcoin has done. And where do you draw the line of scalability? For example, I think you can use the Spiderchain to build a Solana on top of Bitcoin. You could do that extremely fast blocks, huge amount of block space, not decentralized at all. So again, as a sidechain, you are facing this blockchain trilemma again. And that's where also the trade-off in my mind comes, okay, I have to put myself, how decentralized do I want to be? That's where I put myself on the level of, I want every company in the world to be able to run this, or every small company, few individuals to be able to run this. And to answer your question, what does that mean in performance, is we're going to be very similar to Ethereum. So we're going to be probably like double or triple the block space of Ethereum. But I do see a world where you can have basically the ZK rollups, optimistic rollups. You can have that on Botanix. You're going to have multiple layer 2s on Bitcoin as well. And that's how you scale the whole world, all the payments in the world, the whole financial system basically on top of Bitcoin.
How does the miner community feel about this? About the project as a whole? About just, I'm just curious what their pulse is. I'm sure you've chatted with some of them about this.
Yeah, I thought miners would be more interested in the sense that they often have a big Bitcoin stack.
Yep.
And now they can earn trustless yield by running a Botanix node and getting those staking rewards. But I think in general, they are way more in favor of development on Bitcoin main chain, because that basically drives the fees on Bitcoin layer 1 higher, while we actually take away fees from the layer 1 to the layer 2.
Because you're not a roll up or Validium or whatever else. You are right, like Arbitrum, Optimism, they pay fees back to, they send their roll up as a big transaction to the Ethereum layer 1, but you don't do that. You simply have the multi-sigs. Is that right?
we're a semi rollup in the sense that Arbitrum posts all the transaction data. We post a little bit of the transaction data. So the data with us sits on the Botanix level. And so we do constantly have to post back to Bitcoin as well. So we will generate transactions, but not as much as Arbitrum does.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll still have to pay your tithes. Yeah, you'll still have to pay your tithes to the main net like everybody does. So yeah.
Correct.
So I'm not totally sure. You like fully answered my question before, but maybe here's like a new question for you that I'm very curious about with Botanix Labs. I understand personally the benefit of having a base layer of Bitcoin and everything built on top of it. What is your vision for, I guess, Spiderchains and what this could possibly become? Do you think the full functions of what Ethereum, these other chains have done could possibly migrate, fully to Bitcoin? Or do you still see some sort of multi-chain existence where multiple L1s can exist in a world where now we have Bitcoin L2s that can, do these things? And if that is the case, what are the top 3 functions? If you could name like 3 DeFi functions or smart contract functions that are on Ethereum right now, do you think would perform better on Bitcoin? Because one of the arguments from the Bitcoin maxis is, hey, if I wanted to do all the things that Ethereum does, well, I can just go to Ethereum. We don't want to bring that to Bitcoin. But I imagine you're building Spiderchains for some reason because you believe that these functions would perform better in a Bitcoin environment. So why is that?
Yeah. So this is my vision. And actually, there's a few Bitcoin maxis that would not agree with you and would actually say this as well, among which Jameson Lobb, the CTO of Casa, and a big name in the space. They consider anything that happens outside of Bitcoin more or less like a test version to bring them back later to Bitcoin. And so it's actually Jameson who said this on one of the Twitter spaces. But Ethereum was basically a very big test environment, and I think it has reached a huge amount of traction. And so now you can bring that on top of Bitcoin, and that's basically almost literally what we are doing. And so I think most of that development will move to Bitcoin because just of capital efficiencies, it makes so much more sense that all the capital that you have in Bitcoin, the easiest way to use those applications is going to be on top of Bitcoin, and it's not going to be through bridges or central exchanges back then to Ethereum, as long as Bitcoin is the big capital market, so to speak. And so it will over time all migrate to where the capital is. Now, we didn't have the infrastructure yet. Once you build the layer 2s and the infrastructures, that will become all like way more smooth. I'm not fully sure if that's going to be 100% of the market. I can see a world where you have some other more niche layer 1s basically still remain very big in the world because of special use case that chain gains a lot of network effects in. So I do see a little bit, like probably with the reserve currencies that we have in the world right now, 60-70%, I don't know, runs on the US dollar. I could see a world where 60-70% runs on Bitcoin, and then you have different other layer 1s, basically.
Interesting.
So more like a layer 0 almost.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
As a bridge. Yeah. So Bitcoin is the money. It's digital gold. It's really good money, and that's what it's good at. All the rest of the financial system and applications will have to build somehow on the money, which makes the most sense.
No, I get what you're saying, Brandon. We'll come to a point where we have enough layer 2s on Bitcoin that we'll start calling Bitcoin layer 0 and everything else.
That's like the pulse I was getting. I'm like, oh.
We'll talk about layer 0 because I read the Bitcoin magazine, explanation of what Spiderchains is doing, and it did almost sound like Spiderchains was perhaps something of a layer 0, although I know it's a layer 2 built on Bitcoin. But Spiderchains itself is not fully the sidechain, right? It enables the building of sidechains through this multi-sig function. Is that correct? So could there be actual multiple sidechains, sidechain blockchains that are built on Spiderchain? Is that the case?
Yeah, that's totally the case. Actually, the Spiderchain goes a little bit further than that, because the Spiderchain basically decentralizes rollups. And so I can see a future where basically a ZK rollup finally realizes, like, how are we ever going to decentralize a ZK rollup? Actually comes up with a similar design as a Spiderchain, where you decentralize the rollups, so to speak, not the multi-sigs, but to decentralize the rollups. And I do totally believe that the Spiderchain will be used in multiple different types of layer 2s. You probably won't call it Spiderchains, because that wouldn't be interesting, but at least like use it to decentralize those federations that you typically have right now. And to come back to what you first said in the beginning, the Spiderchain indeed is just this middle way of decentralizing the multi-sigs, and it's actually Botanix. What we call Botanix is the EVM, so to speak. Okay. So you can take away the EVM, you can put Solana in there, you can put any other virtual machine in there, you could put a ZK rollup in there. It's basically that's how we're thinking about it. Yeah.
Call it a layer 1.5, right, in between the Bitcoin and the layer 2. Why not? Well, there'll be like a 1.25 next time. So you mentioned you've got these, there are other possibilities, right? You're starting with EVM. There are side chains right now, right? There's Stacks, there's Liquid. I think there's a few more. I've only looked into those two. What is going to make Spiderchain beat those out? Right, because those I think a lot of people argue are not too successful. There's maybe a small group of people who use them, but what is Spiderchain or Botanix? What's Botanix going to do that beats those out?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and let me break that down into multiple points. I think one, compared to Stacks, Stacks is considered by many more like layer 1 that had to build their own new ecosystem on the Stacks token. They do use some of the security benefits of Bitcoin, but in terms of user experience, you cannot send your Bitcoin to Stacks, for example. Now they're coming with an upgrade soon, where you have the SBTC bridge, which is a bridge basically between the two layer 1s. That's how you have to think about it. But still, they use quite a lot of the security of Bitcoin, so you could consider them a sidechain. It's like somewhere in the middle. I think the big difference with Stacks is that, again, when you need to swap from Bitcoin to Stacks token to use any of the applications, that's a hurdle. But the biggest one is probably the non-EVM. So they're not EVM compatible, which makes development really, really hard. So that's definitely, I think, I'm not sure if they're going to move to EVM compatibility or not, but that's definitely a longer timeline and a big hurdle that has slowed down the development on Stacks. Rooting for them a lot, though. I really like that. At some point over the last 5 years, I was a Stacks fan. Then you've got RSK and Liquid. And so let me start with Liquid. So Liquid is a federation, basically 15 people or 15 entities that decide we have a centralized multisig and we run a sidechain. And actually, the Bitcoin Magazine article alluded to that as well. Like, actually, now with the Spiderchain, you can start decentralizing that federation. Now, Liquid, very similar story, is also not EVM compatible. And what a lot of people miss on the EVM compatibility is if you want to use or build on top of Liquid, it's just very hard. Like, the EVM has everything, like tools, libraries, everything is plug and play, wallets. You need to make everything from the ground up again. And so just the user experience there is like really, really hard. And that's really the power of the EVM and the network effects that you have in a certain type of technology. And then RSK is probably the closest one. So RSK is EVM compatible. It works with a centralized multisig as a federation like Liquid, but then uses proof of work for the sidechain, for the consensus part. I think RSK has been struggling a little bit as well with user experience. Like it's not easy to back in and back out from RSK. So you could only do it from a certain type of wallet. The back out also takes quite a bit of time as well. So I need to. My AirPods are dead.
Oh no!
All right. So yeah, RSK is generally very hard to onboard onto that platform as well. I think that's what struggled over them, and they might have been too early. Like they were there, I think, in 2018 already. So maybe a little bit too early, but I totally think their adoption will increase way more as well.
So we've got Bitcoin versus other L1s, right? We've got Bitcoin versus the other Bitcoin scaling options. Botanix versus other L1s, Botanix versus the other Bitcoin scaling options. Can Botanix either help or take down Lightning? It's going to be possible to build, a better payment protocol that's, nearly zero fee, all that. Is it going to be easier to do on top of Botanix?
Yeah, that's a good question that I recently started asking myself as well. Now that we have to decide on the fees for Botanix, etc., we also realized, the fees on Botanix could initially be lower than Lightning. Now, of course, longer term, once you have dApps and deployments, the gas fees, of course, will spike, and Lightning will be always very cheap. We will be fully compatible as well. Probably at some point in time, we will be able to swap from Botanix to Lightning and come back very easily. Now, longer term, I think Lightning still has quite some things to figure out, and you could see a future where basically you have, a layer 3 that is optimized for very cheap payments, more like a Solana type style of more centralized layer 3. And that might be, even when you think about the decentralization scale, Bitcoin at the base layer, extremely decentralized, Botanix running, the companies running it. Maybe that layer 3 will be few governments in the world that only run that, and then you can have basically extremely fast free payments. And so I don't know where that world is going to go to. I think Lightning is incredibly powerful. I really like the design of Lightning because it's the only really decentralized layer 2, actually. So we hope to come close to that decentralization. But yeah, it still has some user vulnerabilities. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, there was still some attack found. That's not easy to cover. So Lightning still has some things to figure out. But I hope Lightning does take off because it allows from the base layer of Bitcoin in just one step to a second layer, fast free payments. But it's hard to predict that future.
This is, maybe it's too technical of a question for the audience. I've been thinking, one of the interesting things when people talk about, Ethereum is better money because it's more sound, whatever. Nobody's trying to build a Lightning competitor on Ethereum, right? Like there seems to be no layer 4 that's only payments, nothing else. And so I do think Lightning is unique in that. But then I've been thinking, actually, Nano has tried that before, right? With I don't know how familiar you are with Nano or other. Now, okay, that's fine. I was going to say they just have a different. It's like a DAG instead of a blockchain, so it's slightly different. And then they have instant and feeless payments. So I am curious. Maybe I'll follow up with you some other time whether it would be possible to build, instead of a different VM, to build something like that on top of the Spiderchain as well. Something, a new payment method on top.
Yeah, that's an interesting design. Actually, I haven't really thought about that longer, but there could be something in there basically that you consider the Spiderchain as being the LSPs, the Lightning Service Providers, and then become like a very fast prepayment. That could be possible. And to come back on Lightning, I always ask myself also that question: why hasn't anyone done Lightning on Ethereum, for example? And I think at some point in Ethereum, they want to do state or the channels, the payment channels, but it never ended up being developed. I'm not sure exactly what the reason why was, but there were some ideas. People worked on it for a certain amount of time.
If you could make the case for Bitcoiners for why this is, why this is a good thing, I'll give you a payment network. A cheaper payment network would be a great application, to see on Spiderchains in the future. But still, a lot of Bitcoiners really only see the benefit of Bitcoin for monetary applications or monetary purposes. And what I see happening on a lot of other chains, Ethereum particularly, but other chains like Arweave and IPFS isn't even a blockchain, but it's a similar function. We're talking like decentralized storage or maybe a decentralized naming system like ENS. And I see a lot of value, to those types of functions on a potentially global virtual machine. Whatever way you want to envision that. Do you think there's value on replicating some of those functions on Bitcoin? And if so, what are like I said, I'll give you the payments network. Give me like maybe 2 other functions that you could just make the argument to Bitcoiners to say, hey, this is actually something that's really interesting that other blockchains are developing, and this is something that if we brought it to Bitcoin, it could be more secure, but then offer a lot of good to the world. What 2 other applications would you like to see built on Spiderchains?
I think that's a very interesting point, and it is actually some kind of a paradox, because a lot of Bitcoiners don't believe anything outside of Bitcoin has any value. But how does that make any sense if you believe that longer term, the whole world is going to be run on Bitcoin? That means a lot of things need to be built on Bitcoin. So there has to be a lot of things outside of Bitcoin. And I think maybe the one example that I always give to a lot of Bitcoiners is basically tokens. So we've got the tokens on Ethereum. I think a lot of people more on those arguments of the Bitcoin side basically think that those don't have any value. But what I think those tokens are literally stocks. And so think about the world right now where someone, I don't know, in Egypt cannot buy one of the stocks in the US because there's this whole guardrails of a huge amount of regulation that doesn't make any sense. Like, why isn't this whole thing global? And so DEXs are just global stock markets. If you want to do an IPO today, there's so many different steps today, and every step of the regulation can give corruption, and that doesn't make any sense at all. And so the DEXs are decentralized stock markets. And if you buy a token, you buy a share in someone's company. And I think that's a very big example on how I try to understand the world of the tokens and the DEXs basically to the current world of stock markets. And then I think the second big application I think is very clear now is stablecoins. I think one of the big reasons that Lightning hasn't taken off is because it doesn't really solve an actual customer need right now. There's no customer problem today that it solves. Like if you go to the store, you want to buy something with the money that you see the price of. So if the price is $10, you want to pay with dollars $10, and you're not going to pay with Bitcoin because like that's a mental jump, even though if you could do it. And a lot of the more religious Bitcoin believers will use it just because they want to use Bitcoin, but for a normal person it doesn't make any sense. But stablecoins actually does that. So now you can have stablecoins, which is the current unit of account. Basically, the unit of account is what currency people think in. And they can actually have that on a blockchain. And they can have that permissionless, and they can send it anywhere permissionless. And so that's why you've seen stablecoins massively increase in adoption, because it solves an actual customer problem. It solves the hyperinflation problems that you've seen in so many different countries, because people like to have their savings in their unit of account, which is still the US dollar. And so if I could bring any of those applications to Bitcoin, I think that would be massive, because that would increase Bitcoin adoption as well, because a lot of people still have to go through the learning curve of the whole macro, of the whole inflation, of the whole dividing the state and money. And so, in short, the stock markets, which are the DEXs and the tokens, which is a permissionless global stock market for anyone in the world. And the second one is stablecoins.
I agree with almost everything you said, except for the fact that you seem to be implying that some of the tokens I might be holding could be unregistered securities. I don't subscribe to that.
You haven't been in the U.S. long enough. Sorry, Willem. No.
And,
Oh, man.
great points.
That
All
is
right.
good.
As we kind of close things up here, Willem, can you tell people where they can find more about Spiderchains, Botanix Labs, and I mean, I'm gonna leave some links for some stuff in the description here in our video for the white paper and stuff. But anything else people should go check out?
Yeah, no, I would say follow the Twitter, stay up to date there. I've seen the testnet running quite a few times now. Right now, we're gonna deploy a few dApps on top of it to make sure that people can use the testnet. We're gonna come out with that in a few weeks. So basically, at that point, we'll announce it on Twitter. On the Twitter, you can also find our link to the website. In the website, there's this area called Learn, where we also can link you to a media part of the website where we will list all different articles and basically where you can find information. But generally, I think the Bitcoin Magazine article and Jameson Lobb's article on the Spiderchain are probably the best ones out there. I thought they were extremely good. I always struggle to explain the Spiderchain and the use of it in more easy terms to understand, but they did a really, really good job.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Anything else as we close things up here?
So I was going to say, you mentioned you've got the testnet running. You know, you've been starting that. Mainnet. When are we going to see this live?
Yeah, very good question. So the testnet in our minds is, I mean, the engineers are incredible. They're one of the most capable engineers. I'm very sure, like we all think constantly, like how they can attack us. So we don't think there's any vulnerabilities here. But it's going to be interesting to go out there with the testnet. And we basically hope that anyone out there, the more technical Bitcoiners, actually try to break it. So we want to learn as much as possible over the coming months, see much more development, basically dApps being deployed. And once we are feeling confident on like, okay, this is actually absolutely secure, because in the end, like we are the ones who developed the first version of the code. You want people to trust you. That's basically when we will go to mainnet. In terms of timeline, that should be in March, which should be like around a month before the halving. So that should be the current timeline as I think.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah, well, this was awesome. Very informative episode. Thank you for joining us this evening. Well, I'm glad we were able to get you rescheduled and have this conversation. So we look forward to seeing what's next and exciting stuff, because this is some stuff that we've talked about on the podcast for a while, and it's really cool to see some of it come into fruition in some way, shape, or form. So we will definitely be following.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Great to meet you.
Thank you.